One issue will be, though, that if you say, well, let's try it out, it's a slightly slower logging speed. So you're looking at 15 feet an hour instead of 60. And why are they slowing down? Well, because they're counting particles. And so to make sure they get good counts, they have to slow it down a bit, because now they're counting in maybe 10 windows to put it together. So yeah, that's going to add to your logging costs in terms of the amount of time spent there. But something to consider. It's not way off the charts. It really isn't exotic. However, you have to say, well, I still have to have an economic reason why I should run it other than the interest in the geology. And this is the issue that happened when the spectral gamma ray log was first brought out. So it really wasn't pushed by Schlumberger at all. In fact, I had somebody in Schlumberger told me that it was a cultural thing. And that was, even though Schlumberger is a multinational, it still has a slightly French flavor. Have you ever wondered why they have blue and white trucks? I've been told reliably that those are the colors of the national racing team of France. And I thought, oh yeah, that makes sense. I guess the white fleur-de-lis on the blue background. But also he said, you know, in France they're not so comfortable with radioactivity. They're more electrical. That's the foundation of their business. They love to work with complicated electrical equations. And so it's more been in the US than that a lot of the work has been done in radioactive tools. And so the ones who really pushed it hard then were Dress or Atlas, which no longer exists today, but would be Baker Atlas. So now, here we have a paper by Fertel and others. They're pushing this because they're saying to the managers come, they're saying, we got this wonderful new tool. And the managers say, well, congratulations, but why should I pay to have it run? And in this example, I had several, but this was where they did have success down in the Austin Chalk. And that was common practice then that, yes, indeed, they'd have a gamma ray log run, and when the engineers would go in and decide where to perforate, sure, they'd be checking out porosity, but by golly, they would focus on the nice clean zones, and they certainly wouldn't zap on the intervals that look radioactive, because they say, those are shales, we're not going to perforate opposite shales. But by running a spectral gamma on it, you could actually partition which of these zones were likely to be shales and which were not. So over here, then this is back in 1980, we have potassium, uranium, and thorium curves out there. So for a shale, we expect to see potassium and thorium build up because of the clay minerals involved. But they were seeing issues like this, where you have what looks like a shale, but no, it's a huge thorium event. And so they said, okay, we'll distinguish then using these three curves which are the shales and which are clean chalk but got lots of uranium. And the idea was that actually within the chalk you have fracture systems which have been transmitting fluids. And by golly, if you get precipitation of salts on those fractures and it gives a little uranium zing, then you are actually picking up fracture zones within this sequence here. So according to them, as they wrote the paper, they were able to increase production 7-fold in some of these wells by simply going back and perforating. Nothing mysterious about that. It's a matter of understanding what you're looking at, the gamma ray log. And this has been known for many years that if you compare a gamma ray log run in an old cased hole with the original open hole logs, you very often can see spiking right opposite your perforations, because as fluid has come in, precipitates some salts on the margins of perforations, and just a little bit of uranium gives that zing, and you can start to see the spiking. So it wasn't the logs were wrong, it's just a matter of us looking at them, understanding. Now you may say, by God, I'm going to run spectral gamma and I'm going to look for fractures all over the place. Sometimes, sometimes not. You can have a fracture system that for some reason it might have been transmitting fluids, but there's no precipitation of salts, and you don't see anything. So you really have to have geology kind of driving the model. Because right here, if you wanted to get some spectral gamma ray logs that are already on file, there must be thousands of them, at least hundreds, run down in the southwest of Kansas then in the Chase group. So this is all Houston gas field stuff. So here we're looking over at our Crider, Winfield, Towanda, and so on. Once again, the SGR is reading the gamma ray as we would see it for conventional gamma ray log. CGR is simply reading potassium and thorium. So if we look at the crida, for example, we see they're pretty much matched up together. There's not much uranium in there. There really isn't that much in the way of shaly material either. Compare that, though, for example, with the Tawanda down here, and if you looked at the gamma ray log as you record it without spectral, say, it looks awfully shaly. Suck out the uranium and slam, it goes straight down. Now you would say, based on what I just heard about the arsenic chalk, this is fractured to beat the band. And say, no, sorry, that's not the case at all. There was a student at KU who did a thesis on this, a master's thesis. He bust open the cores, he found the uranium in it, and it turns out it's in third order cements. So again, unfortunately, you have to have geology has to drive the model. And it worked the other way around, that actually the higher uranium content you had, the lower the permeability, which always mystified me until the student said, well, it's in the cements. But he also did age dating, by the way, on this uranium and found that it's a lot younger than the chase group. So this is later mineralizing solutions that have come in and worked on the porosity. So we're feeding in the sense that I'm talking about geology that we can read from the logs, but you still have to have the geology drives what you're looking at. The dog has to wag the tail, not the other way around. Just as if we had, for example, maybe a professor out of Wichita State leads us on a field trip. When we see a rock is red, he'll tell us what that means. Is it diagenesis? Is it depositional? So we have that same driver here. But it's worth learning, because if you figure out what's going on, you're ahead of the pack. You're learning something about your reservoir. Are you in up permeability or are you going down? Another nice thing actually about the spectral gamma is this is something, as well as the gamma, that can be measured on outcrop. You wave your thing around, it measured on core. They do spectral gammas on core. So if you say, I want my geologist to tell me what's going on, he says, I don't know about logs. You say, okay, get to work. Look at this core. Look at that outcrop, whatever it takes to find out what's going on. And it's nice to have a link then between logging measurements underground and what we see at the surface, particularly if you have a traditional geologist who's spooked by logs other than picking tops and bottoms. So lots of opportunities here. Here's another section, and we're way shallow now. This is actually a water observation hole, which you might suspect, because looking at the depths here, you can see that's 100 feet down. So actually this is grass rich right there. But we're running a spectral gamma on here because the aspects on this one was looking at the Dakota in terms of whether it could provide more water for irrigation, domestic purposes, and so on. But it ran a spectral gamma on it. So I'm showing you this one because this is a clastic succession. So when we looked at that chase group, we're looking at carbonates, which can be hot because of uranium. Here we're looking at sandstones and shales. So looking at this particular well here, we can say, okay, here's the thorium, uranium, potassium. In fact, I was on this one. It was a very shallow hole. And we were looking actually for when we went into the Permian, the Cedar Hill sandstone. And on your typical well, you can pretty much tell because the mud pits turn red, and you say, I think we're in the Permian. But on this well, it didn't happen. They didn't turn red, but we were getting frosted grains of sand that said Aeolian sandstone, said we are in the Cedar Hill sandstone. There's another aspect too. The Cedar Hill sandstone has a certain amount of potassium feldspar. So you think, aha, we will simply look at the potassium curve. So here we go, here's potassium, going wandering around. And we go, oh, there we go, potassium's kicking up. We say that's the unconformity right there, and say, no, actually it's not, it's down here. The issue is that when you actually look at the curves, rather than looking at them individually, you look at them together. So you look at the potassium combined with the thorium.